Hello, wonderful leaders. Welcome to Leadership Boot Camp. This week is all about navigating change, uncertainty, risk. Seems like those kinds of things have been part of our lives for such a long time now and are the things that is dominating the challenges for many, many leaders out there. So this lesson will help you find some tools and strategies that will allow you to navigate those kinds of things: volatility, complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty, risk, and change. In many ways, all of those things seem like we're navigating in the middle of chaos. And I'm joining you here today from the Nile River, and I am in this amazing country, Egypt, and there was something that happened on a tour just this week that really struck me and that I needed to share with you. So we were there in the temple of Horus, one of the war gods, and there was this depiction of Horus using a net to encircle chaos. Inside, in order to depict chaos, there were images of birds and animals and snakes and crocodiles. There was all of this wildlife, this disorder, this natural chaos that surrounds our world. And there was the image of Horus using a net to encircle that and capture it. What was so interesting to me, though, is that all of the gods of Egypt have an animal aspect to them. So I asked our guide, hey, this seems like a contradiction to me. Here we have a pharaoh encircling and capturing all of this chaos, and yet gods themselves are depicted as animals in their animal forms. And what he said just blew me away, and it really, really resonated with how do we navigate through chaos. What he said was that the Egyptians in ancient times believed that from chaos comes order, from darkness comes light, that from this state of uncertainty and risk and volatility, that's where all of our progress as humanity, the growth, the learning, all of the progress, where does that come from? It comes from being able to navigate change and uncertainty and risk. And the way that that happens is that their gods themselves actually have both that positive and negative aspect. For instance, best example is the goddess Sekhmet. Sekhmet is the lioness goddess. She's often depicted with a lioness head and a human body. She is the goddess of war and destruction. Clearly, she's a lion. She has that fierce, fierce tendency. But interestingly, she's also the patron goddess of physicians, of medicine, and of healing. Why those two? Why those two in a single entity? In fact, Sekhmet, another aspect of her is Hathor, the cow. She is also the cow goddess and transforms from one to the other. And the reason for that is because the ancient Egyptians believed that if one can attune to, accept, and allow for that aspect of chaos, you can learn how to navigate it. That it's not about banishing it, fighting it, ignoring it, or getting rid of it. You can't get rid of chaos. You can't get rid of that fierce aspect of the lioness. Instead, what you do is you get to know it, you embrace it, and through embracing of it can come order and progress. So today's lesson is going to give you 5 tips for how to do that. How do you actually do that process of embracing chaos? Because it sounds really nice, but it's hard to do in practice. So I'm going to give you 5 really specific tips for how to do that. The first one is allowing for the discomfort of not knowing. It's really uncomfortable to not know the answer, to not know what to do, to not know how to proceed. When you are in a situation of change and uncertainty, that choice of how do you know what to do is so very present, and it's so very hard. When our brains get into that mode of seeing uncertainty and change, we see that as a threat to ourselves. We feel stress and we feel anxiety. Those feelings guide our responses into that fight, flight, or freeze reaction. You now know how to navigate that. You know how to deal with your stress and your anxiety. You know how to breathe. You know how to take a brain break. You know how to get your mind out of stress mode. So use those skills. But even more importantly, not knowing is a habit that we form. We form habits around how it is that we approach uncertainty and not knowing. Way back in childhood, what did you do? Did you run away? Did you pretend that you knew the right answer? Did you fight back against it with fierceness? The patterns that we develop all through our lives to deal with what do you do when a teacher asks you a question that you don't know the answer to sticks with us through our lives. So really, this tip is about allowing for the discomfort through knowing yourself and your patterns and managing your stress and anxiety. So that's tip 1. Tip number 2, your attention in this world is limited. There is more information out there in the environment and in your mind and in other people's needs that your brain can process. It's a calculus question that is impossible to answer. Moreover, threats, stress, bad moods make that even worse, make our ability to take in information and process it even worse. So what happens is we go to programmed behaviors. We get stuck in emotions. We ruminate and dwell in the past. We also gigantify, catastrophize. We find out what's the worst case scenario and we lean towards that. The solution and the antidote to that is that serenity prayer. You focus on what it is you can control, you let go of what you can't, and you try to figure out how to know what the difference is. That's the solution. When your attention is limited, you can't take it all in. So focus on what it is you can control. Ignore the rest. If you can't control it, don't even think about it if at all possible. Let that go. It's hard to do. And so the more that you practice things like mindfulness, the more that you are able to let things go. Mindfulness is really the ability to be present in the moment without judging, without elaborating, without reacting, just being in the moment. That skill is really important in order to keep your attention on the things that you actually can control. Perfect. Okay, the next one. I want you to resist quick conclusions. Leaders, we all have a tendency and a bias toward action. We always want to jump in and do something about it. It's super frustrating when there's no obvious solution and there's no clear course of action to move forward. The antidote to that is to slow down. Slow down, because if you jump to that first conclusion, it's often going to be the wrong one. In situations where there's so much ambiguity and volatility and complexity, it's important to be able to step back, slow down, and look from a different perspective. I personally love looking from 3 different perspectives. The first one is a wide angle lens. You look for the big picture. What do you actually see in front of you? Not just the specific problem, but what's the bigger picture? How do other people, other projects, other priorities fit in? So use that wide angle lens. The other one is a microscope. Microscope means look at yourself. When you're trying to jump to that quick conclusion, look towards yourself and really understand what is it in me that's driving towards this specific action, and why is it that I'm so focused on that. There's often ways that we get in our own way, so taking the time to try to develop a little self-awareness about that is huge. Finally, zoom. Look into the far, far distance and the far, far future. When I look back on this moment 5 years from now, what choice is it important for me to make? Who is it that I want to be in this moment? Who is it that I want to be 5 years from now, and how do I get there? So being able to look in that far horizon and that far future with a zoom lens is really great. So again, resist that quick conclusion, slow down, and change the lens. Wide angle, microscope, or a zoom. Number 4, the fourth tip for avoiding the chaos is don't command and control. Command and control is so tempting. It's so tempting to try to control the whole situation, to try to gain control. That is, again, what our minds will naturally do when we feel out of control, is we try to take control. The problem is that in complex situations where things are ambiguous and volatile, it calls for agility and small-scale experiments. It calls for flexibility and systems thinking. The way to achieve that is not through one leader trying to figure it out and control it all. Instead, it's a distributed leadership model. There are definitely times where you want to take control and lead the charge. But in ambiguous situations, distributed leadership has been shown to be far more effective. And what that means is that you empower your team and you trust in the ingenuity of others. The more people that there are empowered to respond at speed to rapid change, the faster the fix can be. If they have to wait for your approval on every single decision, you're going to be much slower to respond, and the changes are going to come faster than you are going to be able to deal with them. So empower your people to respond to the changing needs. Your job is to attend to their emotions, their stress, and to coordinate all of their activities. So ease the lines of communication. Find ways to make sure everyone is still headed in the same direction and rowing their oars the same way. But if you can do that, if you can do lots and lots of small-scale experiments, it's going to be much more successful in the long run. So avoid the command and control. Finally, number 5, in times of crisis, the ground feels like it's shifting underneath you. So, in those times, we tend to dwell on scarcity. We tend to develop a scarcity mindset. Like, we don't have enough. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough resources. We don't have enough energy to do what's needed to be done. What is it that you are resourced with? What are your strengths? What are your gifts? What are the things that you have available to you? Who can you call on for help? How can you rely on one another? Help doesn't have to come in one form. Just don't go it alone. Look for your resources. Look for the places where you are resourced so that you don't have to dwell on that scarcity mindset. Another part of that is knowing how it is that you navigated crises in the past. How is it that you navigated complex, ambiguous, uncertain situations? How did you navigate big changes? We often forget and not think about how it is that we drew on resources to navigate that in the past. All of us have navigated hard situations and complex situations full of change. What did you do before? Because if you can know how you resourced yourself then, you can resource yourself the same way now. So, those are my 5 tips. Knowing yourself and your patterns, focusing on what you can control, changing the lens, trusting in the ingenuity of others, and knowing your resources. If you can rely on that, it'll help you navigate uncertainty and change and move from chaos to order. I wanted to let you know that later on in this course, I am going to spend a whole nother lesson really delving into this further. That lesson's going to be about flow. Flow as the idea of how do you navigate through all of these uncertain times. When you get to that lesson, you'll see how we tie in this stuff here about the mind, but we're also going to tie in some emotion work as well as some identity work into that. And we'll integrate that all together in that flow lesson that will come right at the end of the course. So look forward to that one, okay? All right, discussion. Here's what I'd love for you to do. Remember, one of the suggestions was to know yourself and your patterns. How do you deal with not knowing? How has the pattern been developed throughout your life? What did you do as a child when somebody asked you a question that you didn't know the answer to? How does that relate to how you deal with not knowing the ambiguity of change now? If you would feel comfortable, please share how you deal with not knowing. What is your pattern? Then, for your experiment, one of the ways to navigate and actually take action is to try a small experiment, to try something different than you've tried before. What that allows you to do, if you can go right to the edge of scared but not terrified, you'll be able to test out the waters and see what that feels like. Then you can come back to home base, reset, and hopefully find a different pattern. So that is my lesson for you, dear leaders. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week.